Hello friends, and welcome back to the crypt. Okay, enough of that. As you might have guessed based on that opening, this is a Halloween video that I'm making. And like many of you, I've come to really enjoy Halloween. I didn't always, but in recent years, and especially as a pipe smoker, I've really, for reasons that aren't 100% clear to me, have grown to enjoy it, and I think the community in general enjoys Halloween. You know, it's just good spooky fun, and there's lots of Halloween videos, and I didn't want to miss out on the fun, so I'm making one as well. And as I have in past years, I am going to reveal the Halloween pipe, take it out of its coffin. This pipe only sees the light of day once a year. And this is my beautiful Jesse Jones Halloween pipe. Jesse carved this, and actually I won this pipe in a contest on the Brother of Briar form. You can see it's got this beautiful skull ring on it. Really just very, very fitting for the holiday. And the only time I smoke this pipe is once a year on or near Halloween. And the only thing I smoke in this pipe is Cornell & Deal's Haunted Bookshop, which I have just about a bowl left in this jar. So I've been looking forward to, I've actually been saving this. I didn't want to open another jar. So I've been saving this for almost a month now, and I've been really looking forward to it. So let me go ahead and pack up the pipe. So yeah, Halloween, it's an interesting holiday. You know, certainly has its roots in pagan practices, and you know, maybe as a Christian gentleman I shouldn't be celebrating it so much. I know there are some Christian brothers out there that don't like to celebrate it, and yeah, I understand that. I often felt that way myself. You know, as a Catholic, there's All Saints Day, which is very closely associated with this time of year, and it's a time to pray for those that have passed on, and ask them to pray for us. And that, when I was growing up, you know, as a child in Catholic school, that was the focus. You know, Halloween was the night you got candy, but you know, All Saints Day was the day of significance. But like I said, it's good fun, and I've always loved horror movies. Not hardcore horror movies, but the old classic horror movies, sort of like that clip you saw at the beginning. And yeah, so I just kind of enjoy celebrating this season, and it's kind of a nice kickoff for the quote holiday season. You know, as we roll into late fall, well, fall, I guess, and Thanksgiving, and then ultimately into Christmas, and they're already starting to advertise for Christmas, so. Oh, Haunted Bookshop is good. So what I would like to do is related to the clip you saw at the beginning. It probably goes without saying that that clip was from the 1931 movie Frankenstein. And the actor portraying the monster was, of course, Mr. Boris Karloff. And that movie is very likely, it certainly is one of my favorite films, and it may be my favorite film of all time. And the reasons for that, if you have not seen the original Frankenstein, you really should. It is a remarkable movie, and what I love the most about it is, well, first off, the story is just captivating. You've got this scientist that builds a monster out of parts of various corpses that he digs up, and and stitches together, and then he needs to find a brain for it, and his assistant accidentally gets a brain from someone that was criminally insane, and then that's the brain that goes into the, and then they, you know, lift it up into the sky in this tower, and the lightning, and especially all the electrical effects with the sparking and all that, and it brings the monster to life, and then things of course go terribly wrong. The monster escapes, and all sorts of things happen. And so it's a captivating story just in terms of a horror film. But the man who brought this film to life, that brought the monster to life, Boris Karloff, really did a remarkable job, because it's the only movie that I know of where I feel both frightened by the monster, but I also have a great deal of sympathy with him. And at times you feel almost, you feel all sorts of emotions. You feel happiness, you feel sadness, you certainly feel terror. And it's not what you expect from a movie, a horror movie. It certainly isn't what we get from modern horror movies. So it's a wonderful film, and it's always been one of my favorites, if not my favorite. So what I wanted to do today was to dedicate this smoke and this video to the man that brought the monster to life, and that was Boris Karloff. So Boris Karloff was born in November, 23rd of November, 1887, and he was born William Henry Pratt. He was an Englishman born in London. And it's interesting because I eventually knew that, but early on when I first started seeing these things, of course Lugosi has the very unique accent, letting you know that he's from some Eastern European country, some Slavic background. And Karloff always had this accent of sorts that I never would have pegged as being English, at least early on. And the reason that he had that wasn't that he was affecting it, or even that it was part of his background. He had a lisp. He had a very severe lisp. Actually, as a boy, he stuttered and lisped, and it was something that he struggled with as a young man. But he did ultimately overcome the stuttering. However, the lisp remained part of his intrigue, I think, and really was part of what made him the actor that he was. So, as a young man, he attended King's College in London, and was planning on going into government service. His family was heavily involved in the British government's consular service, and that was just sort of what was laid out for him. But early on in 1909, he actually dropped out of college, so he left the university, and he left for Canada. And he lived in Canada for several years, just working as a farm laborer. He didn't have any plans when he just went off to Canada and picked up jobs as farm laborers and did various odd jobs, handyman type stuff and all that, just to survive, until he just kind of stumbled into acting. And he did a lot of stage work in Canada. He was involved with some traveling troops and things like that, and just sort of would work as an actor when he could, and when he couldn't, he would pick up farm work or something like that. He took the stage name Boris Karloff because he thought that it was going to be more memorable than William Henry Pratt, in part. And there's all sorts of stories about where that came from. There's a book that has a scientist in it named Karlov, and there's various plays that have similar sounding actors in it. While people have put that forward as a possibility, it turns out that those things were all published after Karloff was using the name Boris Karloff, so it's actually more likely that they named their characters after Karloff. There's also a story that he, there was some Slavic relative, ancestor that he was honoring with the name, but members of his family say that that's not true, that they don't have any Slavic in their background. So we don't really know where he got the name, but that became the name that really rang down through the history of horror films, and resonated with names like Lon Chaney Jr., and Bela Lugosi. He also changed his name in part because he feared that he would embarrass his family. So, as I mentioned, his family was involved in government work, and all of his brothers worked for the British Foreign Service. And he worried that having his name associated with some of the work he was doing as an actor might embarrass them. But he was pleasantly surprised when he returned to England and was reunited with his family in 1933. So this is, 22 years after he left, so he hasn't seen his family in 22 years. At this point, he had become basically a household name because of Frankenstein and several other horror films that he made prior to 1933. And when he returned, there was this big press event, and his family was there, and his brothers gathered around him, and they had photographs taken with him. And the story is that the brothers all asked the photographer if they could get copies of the picture. And the picture that you're seeing here is probably not from that time. This is probably from a later time. But it is Karloff with his brothers. And he was so pleased that the brothers weren't embarrassed of him, but were in fact proud of him and wanted to have evidence that they were with their famous brother. So that really made him quite happy. He, throughout the time that he was establishing his acting career, he often had to perform manual labor both in Canada and in the U.S. And this left him with lifelong back problems. He had arthritis in his back and a lot of back pain. Eventually he suffered for most of his life, but eventually he did get a surgery that helped somewhat in his later years. But that really was something that plagued him throughout his life. So when he first arrived in Hollywood, it was during the silent film era, and he made many silent films. But it was sporadic work, and he often had to do manual labor and construction work and things like that just to make ends meet. But he did make several silent films, and here you see a still from a movie called The Infidel, in which he played a character named Nabob. And interestingly, Karloff often was asked to play Indian and Chinese roles, which is interesting. Of course, at that time, we weren't too careful with realistic portrayal of ethnic groups. But that was very often the kind of role that he would play. Now, he found fame between 1931 and 1932 with a string of movies, the first of which was where he played the Frankenstein Monster. And just in case you don't know, and I hope everyone does know this, the monster was not named Frankenstein. The monster was named the Monster. And Karloff played him. The doctor, the scientist that created the monster was Frankenstein, so he's the Frankenstein Monster. He also, during this time, played Imhotep the Mummy, and had roles in two other horror films, The Old Dark House and The Mask of Fu Manchu. Now, the one thing that's often noted about Frankenstein is that the makeup and costuming for Frankenstein was quite an ordeal for Karloff. It took 4 hours to apply the makeup, and the makeup was a combination of cotton wadding and some sort of a colloidal gel that would solidify, and of course lots of green grease paint. Interestingly, the monster was green, although it was not shot in color. It turns out that the green color that they chose gives a more sort of ghostly gray cast to the image when it's shot in black and white, and that's why it was made green in the first place. They actually intended the monster to be gray, but they used the green to create that sort of ghostly gray color, their gray tone. In addition to the 4 hours of makeup, he also had to wear platform boots because Karloff was only 5'11". So he wore platform boots that were 4 inches high, and each boot weighed 11 pounds. So you can imagine what it was like walking around with these things on and all this makeup and everything. It must have been hot and just painful. He had back problems. It was quite an ordeal to make this movie, but despite that, his portrayal of the monster is without question one of the iconic roles in the history of horror films. Now, one of the things that's more famous about Karloff is his relationship with Bela Lugosi. He made many movies with Lugosi, and often it was portrayed that there was a rivalry between Lugosi and Karloff, but in reality, that's not true. They worked together. They were colleagues. They weren't friends. They didn't hang out together, but they didn't hate one another. And they certainly made quite a few films together, many of which are well known. And these include films like The Black Cat, The Raven, one of my other favorites, The Invisible Ray, and The Bride of Frankenstein. Karloff also had a wide variety of roles outside of the horror genre of films, and both in films and TV and also on stage. He was in the original Arsenic and Old Lace. He was in a number of films that were not horror, such as The Lost Patrol and The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And he was in many, many TV shows. Made appearances in shows like Wild Wild West and Route 66. And the latter of which, in Route 66, he actually joined Peter Lorre and Lon Chaney Jr. for a Halloween episode in 1962. And sadly, it was on this TV show that Boris Karloff wore the monster makeup for the last time. In addition to his work in film and stage, he also did a lot of voice work. And one thing that I found very interesting when I was researching his life was that he hosted a radio program for children in New York in the 1950s. And on this program, he would play children's music and tell stories and jokes and things like that. And I would love to hear some of that. I'm sure it was very, very interesting to hear that voice talking to children and telling the children's stories and all that. It must have been really, really beautiful. And one of his most memorable voice performances was that of the narrator of Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. That voice makes that cartoon a classic for me. And as much as Frankenstein is an iconic horror film and a film that I have to see every year around Halloween, How the Grinch Stole Christmas is an iconic Christmas story that I need to see every year around Christmas. And for the record, he did not sing the song. He just did the narration. So Karloff, in his final years, returned to England. He always considers himself an Englishman, and interestingly, never officially changed his name. So he always signed official documents, William Henry Pratt. Just found that interesting. He passed away February 2nd, 1969 in England from pneumonia, and he was 81 years old. Karloff was a lifelong pipe smoker, and he seemed to favor billiards. There are many images, both posed and candid, in which he can be seen with his pipe, and it really did seem to be a part of his routine. Now, I can't say for certain what tobacco he smoked. Although, if this magazine is correct, he smoked Union Leader beginning in 1930, so that would have been what he was smoking through the peak of his career in horror films. Union Leader was a predominantly burley-based blend with some added Virginia and a maple topping. According to the ad copy, Union Leader was an old Kentucky burley that had everything. It was smooth, flavorful, and only cost a dime. So, based on that, I like to think that Karloff and I would have shared a similar taste in tobacco, and that he might have even enjoyed a bowl of Carter Hall now and then, and that just kind of makes me feel good about the man. I hope you enjoyed that little biography, if you will, of Boris Karloff, a man who I believe is one of the most iconic actors in the horror genre. And I hope you're all enjoying Halloween and having a special pipe and a special tobacco. So until I see you again, have a very happy Halloween, and try not to be afraid of the dark.
Shut out the light.